This isn't just another story. This is about a young black woman who thought she was doing the right thing, helping a child being bullied. But the child she saved wasn't ordinary. He was the autistic son of one of the richest men in America. And that moment of kindness would pull her into a world she never imagined. Welcome to Black Community Stories. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. Jasmine Jackson was exhausted. The late afternoon sun beat down on the cracked sidewalks of South Chicago as she dragged her feet home from a long shift at the insurance office. Her bag felt heavier than usual, her shoulders stiff. She wasn't even thinking about anything, just how badly she wanted a shower and maybe some leftovers waiting in her fridge. That was when she heard it, shouting. At first, she barely paid attention. Kids were always loud around the neighborhood, chasing each other, roughhousing, playing ball. But this didn't sound like play. It was sharp, taunting, voices overlapping, laughter that carried a cruel edge. Jasmine slowed her steps, turning toward the schoolyard fence. Her eyes narrowed as the scene sharpened before her. A small boy, couldn't be more than 11, was cornered against the chain-link fence. 3 older boys surrounded him, shoving at his shoulders, jeering, imitating his movements in cruel mockery. The boy's hands were clamped over his ears, his body rocking back and forth as though the world was too loud, too harsh. His eyes darted from side to side, wild with panic. Jasmine froze for a split second. She could almost feel his fear from where she stood. This wasn't teasing, it was torment. Her tiredness disappeared. "Hey!" Jasmine's voice cracked through the air like a whip. She marched forward, dropping her bag with a thud against the sidewalk. "Cut it out!" The bullies flinched, surprised by the sudden authority in her tone. One of them, taller than the rest, smirked and tried to play it off. "We're just messing around, lady." "Messing around?" Jasmine shot back. Her eyes locked on his. "Looks like 3 cowards picking on 1 kid. You think that makes you tough?" Her voice rose with a sharpness that demanded respect, the kind that made the boys shift uncomfortably. The smaller ones glanced at each other, then stepped back. The ringleader tried to stand his ground, but Jasmine took 1 bold step closer, her glare cutting into him. "You heard me," she said, low but firm. "Get out of here, now." The silence that followed was heavy. Then, with a muttered curse, the ringleader shoved his hands into his pockets and stalked off. The other 2 followed, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. She turned back to the boy. He hadn't moved much, still crouched against the fence, hands half covering his ears, rocking slightly. His breathing was quick, shallow. Kneeling down to his level, Jasmine softened her voice. "Hey, it's okay now. They're gone." The boy didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked up at her, wide and uncertain, then down again. Jasmine kept her voice gentle, steady. "You're safe. No one's gonna hurt you." She extended her hand, palm up, giving him the choice. After a long pause, he hesitantly let his hand brush hers. His skin was clammy, his fingers trembling, but he held on. "That's it," she murmured, helping him to his feet. "See? You're all right." The boy didn't speak, but his eyes met hers for the briefest moment, eyes filled with something raw, a mix of fear and trust. Jasmine glanced around. "Where's your house, baby? Can you show me?" The boy nodded faintly, pointing down the block. Without letting go of his hand, Jasmine picked up her bag and began walking slowly, matching her steps to his. His silence weighed heavy, but she didn't push. She just stayed close, a steady presence. The streets felt different now. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound louder. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that this moment mattered, though she didn't yet know why. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. The boy's hand was small in Jasmine's palm, his grip unsteady but firm enough to show he trusted her, at least for now. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked beside him, scanning the street ahead. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Still, her senses felt heightened, as though the shadows might produce those bullies again. She glanced down at him, his lips pressed tight, his head tilted slightly, as though he was listening to something only he could hear. From time to time, he gave a quick shake of his head, almost like he was trying to push away noise. Jasmine slowed her pace, careful not to startle him. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said softly. "Just point me in the right direction, okay?" The boy nodded once. His eyes flicked to the left and gestured faintly with his free hand toward a side street lined with neat houses and manicured lawns. Jasmine raised her brows. It wasn't the direction she expected. She followed anyway. They walked in silence for a few blocks until they reached a tall wrought-iron gate. Beyond it sat a sprawling brick mansion, its wide windows glowing with warm light against the falling dusk. Jasmine stopped, blinking at the sight. "You live here?" she asked before she could catch herself. The boy didn't answer. He only stepped closer to the gate, his small hand slipping from hers. For a moment, Jasmine wondered if she had made a mistake following him. But then, the gate buzzed and slid open. A man in a black suit hurried down the driveway, his polished shoes clicking against the stone. His eyes widened when he saw the boy. "Ethan!" the man exclaimed, his voice sharp with relief. He rushed forward, bending down to grip the boy's shoulders. "Where have you been? We've been searching everywhere." Jasmine stood frozen, unsure if she should leave or explain. The boy, Ethan, leaned into the man's arms but kept glancing back at her, his expression still holding that fragile trust. "Who are you?" the suited man demanded, straightening up to face her. His tone wasn't rude, but it carried authority, the kind that came from someone used to being in charge. Jasmine lifted her hands slightly, palms out. "My name's Jasmine. I was walking home from work. Some kids were messing with him at the schoolyard. I stepped in, got them to back off. He pointed me this way, so I walked him home." The man's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before it hardened again. He nodded slowly. "You did the right thing. Thank you." Ethan tugged at the man's sleeve, his eyes darting toward Jasmine again. The boy didn't speak, but his body leaned subtly in her direction. Jasmine swallowed, realizing he didn't want her to just leave. The suited man noticed too. He sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Would you mind stepping inside for a moment? I think Mr. Caldwell would want to meet you himself." "Mr. Caldwell?" Jasmine echoed, glancing at the sprawling house. The name meant nothing to her, but the mansion screamed wealth. Her instincts told her this wasn't the kind of invitation you got every day. Still, hesitation prickled at her. "I don't want to intrude. I was just doing what anyone should have done." The man shook his head firmly. "Not anyone would have stopped. Please, just a few minutes. It would mean a lot to Ethan, and to his father. Jasmine looked at Ethan again. His eyes were wide, locked on her like she was the only anchor in a storm. Against her better judgment, she nodded. All right. Just a few minutes. The suited man exhaled in relief and guided them both through the gates. As they walked up the driveway, Jasmine's nerves tightened. The house loomed larger with every step, its stone walls and towering windows almost intimidating. She clutched her bag strap, reminding herself she had nothing to be afraid of. Yet the air felt different now, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. She was stepping into another world, one she hadn't been invited to before this evening. The mansion doors opened before Jasmine could even take in the size of the place. Warm light spilled into the night, revealing a grand foyer with marble floors that gleamed under a chandelier. She froze at the threshold, her shoes suddenly feeling too worn, her work uniform too plain for such polished surroundings. The suited man, who introduced himself quickly as Marcus, gestured her inside. Ethan clung to his arm, but kept glancing at Jasmine, his silent plea, enough to keep her moving forward. "Mr. Caldwell is in his study," Marcus said, as he led them down a wide hallway lined with framed art and shelves of leather-bound books. "He'll want to hear directly from you." Jasmine nodded, though her throat tightened. This wasn't the kind of place she ever expected to find herself in. She had spent her day answering phones at the office, typing reports until her fingers cramped, only to trudge home with aching legs and thoughts of overdue bills. Now she was walking through a house so large it felt like a hotel. At the end of the hall, Marcus knocked gently on a tall wooden door before pushing it open. Inside, the study smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. Behind a heavy desk sat a man in his early 50s, his hair graying at the temples, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were tired, though sharp. "Mr. Caldwell," Marcus began, "we found Ethan." The man stood so fast his chair nearly toppled. His gaze snapped to his son, relief flooding his features. He crossed the room in long strides and dropped to one knee, pulling Ethan into his arms. "God, Ethan, you scared me," he murmured, pressing his forehead against the boy's. His voice cracked for a moment, betraying the strength he normally wore like armor. Ethan didn't resist, but he didn't speak either. He only clung to his father's sleeve, rocking slightly as though the embrace wasn't quite enough to calm him. It was only then that Caldwell noticed Jasmine, his eyes, sharp, blue, and probing, fixed on her. He rose slowly, straightening his shirt as he did. "And you are?" Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My name's Jasmine. I was walking home from work. I saw some boys at the schoolyard. They were ganging up on him. I stepped in, got them to stop. He pointed the way here, so I walked him home." Silence hung in the air for a beat. Caldwell's gaze lingered on her, measuring, as though trying to decide if she was trustworthy. Finally, he extended his hand. "Daniel Caldwell, Ethan's father." His handshake was firm, but not cold. Jasmine met his eyes, and for a moment she saw not the billionaire or the man in the expensive watch, but a father, tired, worried, protective. "You have my gratitude," he said simply. "You don't know what this means." Jasmine shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of his thanks. Anyone would have done the same. Caldwell shook his head. "No, most people would have kept walking. You didn't. That matters." Ethan tugged at his sleeve, his eyes flicking toward Jasmine again. Caldwell followed his son's gaze, noticing the unspoken bond forming between them. His jaw tightened slightly, as though trying to understand why Ethan connected so quickly to a stranger, when it was so hard for him to connect with anyone else. Marcus cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps Jasmine should sit down. She looks like she's been on her feet all day." Jasmine started to protest, but Caldwell gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. "Please, just for a moment. I'd like to hear exactly what happened." She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair. The cushion was so soft it nearly swallowed her whole. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, choosing her words carefully as she described the scene at the schoolyard. The shouting, the way Ethan had covered his ears, the cruel laughter of the boys. As she spoke, Caldwell's expression darkened, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. When she finished, silence filled the study once more. Caldwell leaned back against his desk, one hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "You've given me more than a report," he said finally. "You've given me a reminder of how vulnerable my son really is, and how cruel this world can be." His words hung heavy, and Jasmine couldn't help but wonder what exactly she had stepped into. This wasn't just about a boy and some bullies. It was bigger. Jasmine sat in the Caldwell study, still trying to process the surreal moment. She kept glancing at the walls lined with thick books, and the fireplace that crackled quietly, as if even the flames were richer than anything she'd known. She felt out of place, like a passerby who had accidentally stepped onto the stage of someone else's life. Daniel Caldwell, however, studied her closely. He wasn't unkind, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that reminded her of the men at her office, men who signed paychecks and made decisions without second-guessing themselves. "You said those boys mocked him," Caldwell said, his voice low but firm. "What exactly did they say?" Jasmine hesitated. The memory of the cruel laughter still stung. "They called him weird. Said he was broken. One of them shoved him pretty hard. She glanced at Ethan, who now sat curled in a chair by the window, staring out as if the conversation wasn't about him at all. He couldn't handle it. He was rocking back and forth, covering his ears. That's when I stepped in." Caldwell's jaw clenched. He looked down for a moment, exhaling sharply, before turning back to Jasmine. "You did more than step in. You protected him. For that, I owe you." Jasmine shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. He's just a kid. I couldn't walk away." But Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly, and his tone shifted. "Most people would have walked away. You didn't. That means something." There was weight behind his words, as if he was testing her, or offering something she didn't yet understand. The tension broke when Marcus, the assistant, appeared at the door. "Sir, the driver is ready if you'd like Jasmine taken home." Jasmine almost leapt at the offer, eager to escape the suffocating grandeur of the place. But before she could speak, Ethan stirred. He turned from the window and walked toward her slowly, his steps hesitant but deliberate. Then, without saying a word, he reached out and took her hand. The gesture stunned the room into silence. Marcus raised his brows. Caldwell looked down at his son, his face flickering with surprise, and something else Jasmine couldn't read. "Ethan," Caldwell murmured, but the boy only clung tighter. Jasmine swallowed, unsure what to do. She squeezed Ethan's hand gently. "It's okay," she said softly, though her voice shook. Caldwell watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded to Marcus. "Cancel the car. Jasmine will stay for dinner." Her heart skipped. "Oh no, that's not necessary. Really, I should—" But Caldwell cut her off. "You've already done something no one else has managed. Ethan trusts you. That doesn't happen often. Please, stay." His tone left little room for argument. Jasmine sat frozen, torn between politeness and discomfort, before finally nodding. Dinner was unlike anything she'd experienced. A long oak table stretched across a dining room big enough to fit her entire apartment twice over. Silverware gleamed under golden light, and servers appeared silently with plates of food that looked like art more than meals. Jasmine hardly tasted any of it. Her mind was too busy replaying the schoolyard, the mansion, Ethan's small hand gripping hers. At the table, Ethan sat beside her, picking at his food in silence but never letting go of her sleeve. Caldwell watched closely, asking Jasmine careful questions about herself, where she worked, where she lived, her family. His tone wasn't casual. It felt like an interview. "So," he said finally, setting down his fork, "you work in administration? Office support?" "Yes," Jasmine said carefully. "It's not much, but it pays the bills." Caldwell nodded, though his eyes stayed sharp. "You deserve more than just scraping by. People with your courage, your instincts, they're rare." Jasmine blinked, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to anyone noticing her, much less praising her. Before she could respond, Ethan suddenly dropped his fork, the clang echoing through the room. He covered his ears, his face scrunching. Jasmine leaned toward him instinctively. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered. "Just noise. Nothing's wrong." Her calm voice steadied him, and slowly, Ethan relaxed. Caldwell watched the entire scene unfold, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. When Ethan finally returned to eating, Caldwell leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "You see?" he said, his voice almost a whisper. "He listens to you." The room went silent again. Jasmine felt a strange weight settle over her, heavier than anything she carried home from work. She wasn't just a stranger who had helped a boy. She was becoming part of something much larger, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Jasmine left the Caldwell mansion late that night, her head spinning. The chauffeur dropped her back in her neighborhood, but even as she walked up the steps to her apartment, the day replayed itself in flashes. The bullies, Ethan's wide eyes, Caldwell's piercing stare across that long dining table. Sleep didn't come easily. She kept thinking of the boy's hand clinging to hers, the way his rocking slowed when she whispered to him, and the way his father looked at her like she had cracked some secret code no one else could. The next morning, she dragged herself to work, half expecting it all to feel like a strange dream. But just after noon, her office phone rang. "Jasmine Williams," the receptionist called from across the cubicles. "There's someone here asking for you." Jasmine frowned, confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the front and froze. Standing in the reception area was Marcus, the Caldwell assistant, his suit as sharp as the night before. Every pair of eyes in the office turned toward them. "Good afternoon, Miss Williams," Marcus said smoothly. "Mr. Caldwell requests your presence." Her co-workers gawked. Jasmine felt her pulse race. "Here? Now?" Marcus gave a small smile. He sent a car. The drive across the city was quiet, Jasmine's nerves chewing at her. When they arrived at the Caldwell corporate building, glass walls stretching toward the sky. She realized this wasn't just a home visit. She was stepping into his world of business, power, and decisions that moved millions of dollars. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished stone and steel. Employees in tailored suits moved briskly, some casting curious looks as Jasmine, still in her modest office clothes, followed Marcus toward the top floor. They entered Caldwell's office, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. The city stretched out like a map beneath them. Caldwell stood by the glass, his suit pressed, his presence commanding. "Jasmine," he said, turning with a faint smile. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed hard. I wasn't sure why you wanted to see me." He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." She obeyed, heart pounding. Ethan wasn't there. It was just her and Caldwell, and the silence between them hummed with weight. He leaned on the edge of his desk, hands clasped. "I've spent years trying to shield my son. Therapy, teachers, specialists, you name it. But none of them reached him the way you did. In one moment, you connected with him. He trusted you." Jasmine looked down, unsure what to say. "I don't know how. I just treated him like a kid who needed help." Caldwell studied her. "Exactly, and that's something money can't buy." The room felt smaller suddenly, the weight of his words pressing in. Then he straightened. "I want to offer you something," he said. "Not charity, not a favor, an opportunity." Her stomach flipped. "I'd like you to work with Ethan," Caldwell continued. "Be a companion, a support, someone who can help him feel safe. It would mean leaving your current job, but I promise you, your life would change, financially, personally, in every way." Jasmine's breath caught. She thought of her cramped apartment, the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, the long days of office drudgery, and then she thought of Ethan, his small hand in hers, his eyes darting with panic until she calmed him. "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. Caldwell's gaze softened just slightly. "Because he chose you, and because I trust my son's instincts more than anything else in this world." For a long moment, Jasmine sat frozen. Her entire life had been ordinary, filled with small routines and quiet struggles. Now, sitting in the glass tower of a billionaire, she realized her world was about to change forever. Not because she sought it, but because of one simple act of kindness in a schoolyard. Her decision that night, as she looked out over the glittering city skyline from Caldwell's office, would tie her fate to Ethan's and to a family whose wealth and power were far beyond anything she had known. The story of her life was no longer the same. The end. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really loved this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.